You're listening to the Scene and Solve podcast brought to you by Hubbard-Hall. Better results, less chemistry.
So welcome to this edition of Scene and Solve presented by Hubbard-Hall. I'm Tim Pennington, editor of finishingandcoating.com. And today we're speaking again with Jameson Grout from Hubbard-Hall. And we're going to be talking on a very interesting topic that I know that a lot of people face in the job shop and the captive shops is cleaning from the floor, what operators need to look for on the shop floor to ensure consistent quality. And yes, I hear that a lot, Jameson, from it seems like every issue in the shop can get traced back to whether the part was cleaned correctly, whether it was pre-treated correctly. It seems like it all goes back to that. I'm sure you've heard the same thing from a lot of customers you deal with.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely are times where there's problems with a bath, and we need to address those. But the vast majority of the time, things come back to something in the pre-treatment, something wasn't clean enough. And so today I kind of want to talk about, like, how do you know something's clean enough? What's something that operators can keep an eye on? Because, I mean, they need to stop if things aren't clean. So how do you know when to stop?
Right. Well, I'll interject. You know, it's funny, as I hear this a lot from shop owners who will say they often don't know what contaminants are on the parts, right? They don't know what's on there, or something has changed in the manufacturing process where it's either a new cutting fluid or it's a new whatever the manufacturer or the OEM or the machine shop has put on there and hasn't told them about. And it's almost like a moving target. But still, that's, I mean, what do you think of that? I mean, that seems to be something that I hear a lot from, and it's difficult, I know, for a lot of these shops to try to attack it in a certain way, right?
Yeah, you hear it a lot, and it is true. I mean, you kind of design your pre-treatment to be as robust as possible, but the fact of the matter is things are changing upstream that are out of your hands. Sometimes things that you never even get the truth on, right? Because if it is causing problems, a lot of people don't want to admit that downstream. So it's a hard challenge. As a job shop especially, you have no control over incoming quality, and you're kind of expected to adjust and pivot to account for that. And also, we talk about, there's no universal good cleaner. There's so many different cutting fluids and degrees, shop soils or whatever that could be on parts coming in. It's impossible to have just a one-stop shop for everything.
Right. Or one answer, like you said, one answer that just wipes it away. I know that, like you said, in Europe, they have a standard over there in NVDA 19, which dictates that, parts going from one facility to another, such as a manufacturer to a finishing shop, has to be cleaned to a very precise cleaning standard until that comes here, which means they basically clean it before they ship it out, which they're not going to do here yet. But let's get into this. So, like I said, we've heard the number. We were talking earlier. Possibly 90% of these problems can be traced back to that. So why is it such a large issue, and what can shops do from the beginning to make sure that they're getting a really consistent quality clean every time?
So I think step one is understanding, like, your first step, aqueous degreasing tank. I think the first step is understanding what type you have and how it's supposed to be operating. So we kind of have some umbrella terms here, but things basically fall down into emulsifiable cleaners or splitting cleaners, splitting chemistries. So you need to know what you have, and your operators need to know what it's supposed to look like and when the cleaner tank is failing itself. So we won't talk any crazy chemistry stuff, but emulsifiable cleaners are cleaners that will hold the oil in solution with the cleaning chemistry. So it's always going to be kind of cloudy, murky looking, but it should always be free of oil visually. Opposite end of that is the actual splitting style, where they actually are taking the oil off your part and they're just kicking it right to the surface. So some cleaners are always going to be generating this oil slick on the top. So if you have a splitting cleaner, you need to account for that with equipment. You need some kind of weir on the tank. You need some kind of skimmer, something constantly removing the oil from the top of the tank. If you have an emulsifiable cleaner, though, you should never have a slick on the top. So if you do find yourself with a slick on the top, it's telling you a few things. It's saying this cleaner is so spent, it's exhausted, it can't hold any more oil. So it's not cleaning your parts anymore, right? It's just a dirty water tank at that point with a bunch of
Well,
oil
it's probably
in it.
making them dirtier. I mean, if it's probably,
Yeah, it
doing
probably
more
is.
harm than good. Yeah.
And that's exactly what you end up seeing because so if you're not removing that slick from a splitter, or if you're generating a slick from an emulsifiable tank, that part's coming right back through it on its way out of the tank. And at this point, you don't have a clean part, and it's just going to cause problems downstream.
Right. So, it's like you said, it's, cleaning should be most people think it should be a straightforward a process there. What variables are involved in this? When you put, you put a dirty part in, you're supposed to, it comes off and you move it on. But what variables, what's going wrong that's causing these problems, do you think?
So it could be the cleaner you have is not equipped to address whatever that soil is on the part. We do see that sometimes. The cutting fluid upstream changed, and all of a sudden what you have is the wrong product. That's a small case, and it's not something I really want to focus on today. But what you do see is maybe parts come in with more oil, or it doesn't have to be oil per se, but what you see shops not doing is adjusting their dump frequencies based on that new level of contamination, right? Because if you lock yourself on a calendar, you may find yourself in trouble. The tank may get spent before that 6 weeks is up or whatever. So that's definitely one problem. Or another problem is just not maintaining skimmers and that kind of equipment. And then you have that slick on top. And if operators aren't aware that you don't want to be pulling back through any kind of oil on the top, if that knowledge isn't there, then you're just going to keep running into the same quality defects time and time.
Right. So talk about the oil slick. I mean, I've never really seen that, but I guess, and is it a visual observation or is that really what it is? That's how scientific it gets, is that you can see it on there?
Yeah. So I was actually at a shop last week, the week before. I mean, this is something that comes up all the time. I can give you a dozen stories, but I was at a shop last week looking at a completely different line. We were looking at an aluminum line, and they were giving me a little tour on the way out, and I was looking at the black oxide line, and just at the angle we were walking, I could see the iridescent sheen all over the cleaner tank and all over the following rinse tanks. And I just asked the operator, like, you guys seeing any spotting issues or anything in the black oxide? And he said he's been working overtime the last 3 weeks because they're reworking so many parts. So just the awareness wasn't there. And, I grabbed him, I grabbed the floor supervisor, and I was just showing him, if you get down at an angle, look at that surface from like a 30 or 45, if you see any kind of rainbow color or any kind of iridescence, you're probably saturated. And that's just staying on the parts the whole way down. And then you're not getting good activation in the actual business tank.
Right. So like I said, looking for the oil slicks. The other telltale sign, I guess, is like I said, as you mentioned, they're having problems down the line with the actual coating, or did you say spotting? Is that what you called it? Or
yeah, typically, so with like a conversion coating, you may see a difference in color because now, like that black oxide or that phosphate tank, it's attacking that part at different rates because it needs to eat through whatever oil is there. You may see some shadowing, some gray spots or something. But in a plating tank, you may just see a blister. It never properly activated there, and then it's popping right away or it's popping after some kind of bake down the line.
Aside from the oil slicks, I mean, what other things can they be looking at? What other things that they can be doing that would prevent, that point where it's just not working anymore for them? What else should they be looking for?
We have we'll call them archaic tests, but there are some things that operators can be actively doing right on the line as they're processing. And I think the two big ones are kind of, your water break test and what they call a white glove test or a smutting test. So we hear water break a lot. It's a NADCAP term. It's a best practice term. But you'd be surprised how often, you ask operators, are you water break testing? And they don't fully understand what you're asking them. So really what the water break is telling you is there anything on that surface still coming out of the rinse tank? So typically you would go in your cleaner for 10, 15 minutes, whatever, and you start going through your rinses. And that's when you really want your guys to slow down coming out of that rinse tank, hold it up for 10, 15 seconds, whatever your spec is. A lot of the specs call for different times, but you want to hold the part up in good light. Let's get at a slight angle and see, is the water running straight off? They call it a sheen. Is it coming off, or are there any kind of disruptions, any kind of bumps, mottled appearance? It could be a bunch of little fine ones. It could be just some wavy lines. I mean, water break issues can present a bunch of different ways. Sometimes they're only in the middle. Sometimes they're more pronounced on edges. So you want a flatter surface to kind of evaluate the part. The flatter, the better. The bigger, the better. I know that's not always possible, but if you come in and out of that rinse a few times and you pull up and you just hold it there for 10 seconds, you really want to make sure everything is sheening right off.
Right. It seems like it's a pretty subjective way to do it, right? I mean, depending on whose eye it is and who's looking at it, right? But it really is truly the kind of the best tool they've got to a certain extent, right? I mean, is just doing that type of test and then seeing how it, how clean is it for them.
Yeah, and it's also one of those tests where the longer you look, the higher the chance you find something. Like if you stand there for 35, 40 seconds, you're going to see things breaking eventually. So it really tells you if you're in a critical danger, like this didn't clean at all, in which case, you go back in the cleaner or address otherwise. Maybe you need some offline cleaning. Maybe the cleaner's spent, maybe the substrate changed or whatever, but it's still pretty accurate enough. It's worth doing.
It's kind of a telltale sign, right? I mean, if it's not, obviously, if it's not doing it, then that's your problem right there with that. If it's not giving you the water break that you're looking for.
Yeah, and you also want to make sure you're doing it at the right time. That first aqueous cleaner tank, that is usually your main, degreaser, and that's the one that's going to be removing the oil that's going to be causing these water breaks. I see some shops, they'll clean, rinse, acid, rinse, and then maybe go into a strike, and they'll water break after that acid tank. I'm saying at that point, it may be too late. So you want to get in and out of that soak degreaser, that hot, caustic degreasing tank, rinse, and you want to water break at that point. I would even do it before electro cleaning if that's in your process. Really, a true dedicated electro cleaner is not going to remove oils. That's not what it's formulated to do. It's more targeted towards oxides. So at that point, you don't have anything in the line removing that oil until you're in your hot processing tank or something. So, right, yeah. I was going to say, it's then you're sort of in trouble at that point where you're carrying those contaminants all the way through to a part, which even makes it worse getting down there. But talk about pretreatment, other maintenance. Any other advice you always give some of your shops about how they can, kind of put together a pretreatment maintenance program to look at what they're doing besides, just the water breaks and other type of things? Or yeah, so if you want the lab to or if you have a lab, if you want your lab or your operators to kind of stay on top of the tanks, I really like filters and agitating cleaner tanks, rinses if you can. Even putting filters in acid tanks, you always have particulates building up here and there, salts and whatnot, and even though a filter may not take out oils unless it's a dedicated coalescing filter pump or something, or if you have some kind of membrane technology, there's a lot of new technology coming out with cleaners especially formulated to remove oil in process offline. There's that kind of stuff. But agitation, I think it's important to think about because you really want your guys thinking about fresh solution coming to the part as quickly and readily as possible. That's really what's driving anything happening in most of these tanks. The cleaner tank, the acid activating tank, the plating tank itself, is you really want that exchange of fresh chemistry over the parts. That's going to cut down on your processing time. It's going to give you more consistency throughout the day and throughout shifts. So I would definitely say it's worth investing in putting filters on those pre-treatment tanks. They're just woven ones, nothing crazy. You don't need a 1 micron filter bag on a cleaner tank, nothing.
Right. Do a lot of shops that you're familiar with, are they spending a lot of time doing exactly what you talked about of, what you call, kind of pre-treatment cleaning maintenance of, checking in? It almost seems like people do things as a reactionary. They start seeing a problem and then they go and try to track it down. But are a lot of people doing things like they're being kind of proactive as much as you would like them to be, of either weekly or daily seeing things, or what is it that they should be doing on that?
Short answer is no. Actually, you don't get into arguments, but you get into philosophical differences, because a lot of people, they have their calendar dump, and that's what the budget is based off of, and that's what they do, and that's how they've always done it. So a lot of times, like you'll be talking to engineers, and that cleaner tank's supposed to last for 6 weeks, and if it's not, they want to know why the chemistry is not as good as it used to be, or what we're going to do to fix it. Is there an additive or something? And a lot of times, no, it's just, the incoming oil has changed, and you have to react to your different inputs now.
Like I said, one of the things I see the most when I go to conferences where people are talking about issues they're having, usually that's where it gets backtracked to. But I don't see people spending as much time up front trying to make sure that they have a really good system, and making sure that that they've got up-to-date chemistry. And I mean, kind of later development. I know you guys are constantly developing newer chemistries to work on some of these things, but some people, like you said, they just get on a schedule. We're going to dump it here, and they try to leg it out as much as they can. I think that really costs them, don't you think? I mean, it costs them big time by trying to stretch it out.
Yeah, definitely. That's the way we've always done things. Those are, dangerous phrases that you hear a lot. But then also, what's the price of rework? And
right.
That's always the conversation you have. We did talk about the water break test. And I mentioned it's not so great after acid baths. So there's another kind of archaic test that I've actually talked to 2 people about in the last week. And that is the white glove test or a smutting test. And it just came up. I was talking to somebody about some electroless nickel issues they were having, activation problems. They were having blisters, and chasing down the pretreatment. One of the things that they had mentioned was that, they started having problems. So they started increasing their pretreatment times, which, I mean, it sounds like a good idea. But sometimes, it can be too much of a good thing is a bad thing. So acid tanks, especially for stainless steels, I've been seeing lately, it's come up, it's weird. But if you're camping in that acid tank too long, you can actually start to generate a smut on the steel. And that may not readily remove in the rinse tanks. So what I told them to do is, if you can get a white cotton glove, come out of that tank, rinse it a little bit, and then see if you can wipe your finger on it. And if you generate, some noticeable black smut on your finger, then, we need to reevaluate how we're approaching those acid tanks. So we ended up just cutting the HCl immersion time way back to what their normal process should have been. And a lot of the adhesion problems went away. And I had a call a few weeks ago for a black oxide customer, stainless steel. They were having some really smutty black oxide coatings, and it turned out to be the same exact problem. So that's another thing to keep an eye on. Acid activation tanks in general, you got to be careful, because you're putting the parts in acid to remove that oxide layer, to get it excited, or however you want to describe the activation step. But when acid's attacking the oxide, it's not going to be gassing, or it shouldn't be. Once you start to see that tank gassing, then you know that you're actually attacking the substrate. And maybe that's what you want. I mean, there's etch steps. Maybe that's what your desired outcome is. But a lot of times, the rougher the surface you could be creating, it's non-uniform. From a surface standpoint, it could be jagged now. But also, if you have an alloying element, now your surface alloy is twisted. So over etching in those acid steps could cause issues in multiple processes downstream, whether you're generating a smut, or you're kind of opening the door to some pitting issues or roughness issues in things like electroless nickel, that they really like smooth surfaces. So I would definitely, that's a good thing for operators to understand, is sometimes it can be too much of a good thing, and then you open the door to a lot of problems.
Right. Too much salt in your dinner will do bad things by just trying to you're hiding something else, right? You're not really solving the problem that's really being the core issue, right? It seems like they're just winging it sometimes when they try to do that, where they're going outside of their spec or outside of their standard procedures, and it usually does. That drift causes problems when they get into it, right? It causes other problems may eliminate one, but probably causing another, right? It's the things that they should be looking for, because I know, like I said, it is a moving target sometimes for people who don't put much time and seriousness into it as they should be, of looking at the rinse tanks and the pre-treatment and everything. So, well, Jameson, I appreciate you joining us today and helping solve some problems for shops on Seen and Solved. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks for having me.
The Seen and Solved podcast is brought to you by Hubbard-Hall. For more podcasts, visit hubbardhall.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to like and subscribe, rate and review, and join us on social media.